After I made my video on why Super Mario 64 is creepy, I didn't really expect much out of the video. I just made the video for fun, and the video ended up blowing up, becoming way bigger than I expected. In the video, one of the points I talked about was the mystery of whether or not the star sign in the Super Mario 64 courtyard says L is real 2401 or not, which people believe meant that Luigi was somewhere hidden in the game, but he just hadn't been found yet. Almost a year after I posted the video, I received a comment from a viewer that I wouldn't realize the importance of until later. The comment read, L is real 2401 is just eternal star but compressed into oblivion. He then mentioned his method for seeing the words eternal star. He said, the trick to seeing eternal star is finding the texture file, not hard to do, and zooming way out. It becomes much more clear that it says eternal star under those conditions. Can't tell you what the message under it says. I read the comment and opened up paint.net on my computer, and did as he suggested. I resized the photo to as small as I could physically read it, but I wasn't able to see eternal star, so I told the commenter this. I also mentioned that the line below the message could be the name of the artist who created the graphic. Because of issues with YouTube comments, we ended up switching over to Discord, where he asked to be referred to as Darkfang in this video, and linked a zip file titled liseternal.rar. In the file, he introduced himself, saying, First things first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Darkfang. I'm a game developer. I specialize in 2D and 3D graphics, and have been both a game developer and a pixel artist for 18 years. There's no chance you've ever heard of me. I'm fairly unknown as of yet, but if I do end up running a social media, it will be on Parler, at devdarkfangrosroth. When it comes to L is real, I've just never really bought that that's what the sign said. Doing this for so long changed the way I see pixels. I see things others don't, but I've never been able to see L is real 2401. Where most pixel artists and creators in general cut corners, skip instructions, and collect their check, I've always been meticulous with detail, oftentimes spending way too long making just one almost imperceptible cluster of pixels look as readable and natural as possible. Detail is what I do. It's how I taught myself pixel art. That said, I've decided to use my expertise to solve the L is real theory once and for all, and prove that L is a lie. Please note that I'm not doing this out of malice, just for science. Darkfang also included a folder with examples of some of his work to prove that he actually knows what he's talking about. The work was extremely impressive, and any doubt that I had in my mind disappeared completely. I went back to his note and read his process of how he analyzed the L is real sign. He first downloaded the original graphic and got rid of the gap between what people thought was an L and the next letter over. The possible reason for this gap will be covered later in this video. He also downloaded the Super Mario 64 font that was used in the game, because to Darkfang's highly trained eyes, the pixelated font looked like the font used throughout the game. I don't think there's any reason to debate that the same font was used, because that same font is used all throughout the game, and based on the shape of the pixels, it seems pretty clear he was correct. Darkfang typed out Eternal Star into Photoshop, pixelated the layer in 12-point font, and played around with the scale. He first scaled up the text by 350% to replicate the text in the plaque as closely as possible. They likely chose 350% to make the HUD large enough for the player to see. In video games, it is crucial for the person playing the game to be able to see the game information in basically no time at all. So there is a huge importance in the player being able to see the HUD and know how much health they have, how many lives, etc. in as small a time as possible, but without the HUD taking up too much space. For example, the Street Fighter health bar is crooked for the player to be able to look up or down and process how much health they and their opponents have, but without the health bar taking up too much of the screen and becoming a distraction. This is why the size of the UI for Super Mario 64 was so important. In this screenshot sent to me by Darkfang, he demonstrated how the UI would look in 300% and 400% compared to 350%. 300% may have seemed a little too small and not quite grabbing enough to Nintendo. 400 is too imposing and kind of clutters the screen, but 350% is just right. That's likely why Nintendo chose 350%, it just looked and felt the best on the screen. There will be an explanation of the significance of 350% relating to the L is real sign later, but that's all that's needed to know right now. That 350% increase in size, plus Nintendo's method of pixel arrangement, changed how the text looked in more ways than just size. Looking closer, this becomes apparent in the form of slight, almost imperceptible distortions in the pixels that make up the in-game font. Darkfang's goal was to replicate the distortion in the in-game text. He then took that text and shrank it down by about 13% using bilinear interpolation, which uses blurring to soften images while scaling. 13% allowed for the Eternal Star text to fit pretty well, so that was the size down that he decided to use. This gave Darkfang a replication of the text on the sign. Darkfang repeated the same process for L is real and another popular theorized option, a secret star. He scaled down L is real and a secret star down by 13% as well, because he figured that if Eternal Star fits, the other two should as well, if the theories hold any water. Darkfang added all the different pixelated versions of the text onto the plaque and put them in this image. First, let's look at L is real. With this method used to pixelate the text, L is real isn't even close to the same length as what the actual text is. Each side is only 1 pixel away from reaching the end, and the text is 3 pixels longer than the actual thing. 3 pixels doesn't sound like a lot at first, but keep in mind that that's about 11% larger on this 32 by 32 graphic. It's strange because I never even thought of the fact that L is real could be too long, but it seems obvious now. L is real is much longer than Eternal, at 9 characters long compared to Eternal being 7 characters long. Besides the length being an inconsistency, the 2401 doesn't look at all like the last word on the plaque. The numbers are way too tall to pixelate like how they did on the plaque. Just look at the size difference between the two. Digits in Super Mario 64 are far too large for this to be 2401. Now, let's focus on a secret star. It looks slightly similar to what's on the sign, but the A pretty much ruins any chance of it saying a secret star. This one isn't really as debated as a theory, so I don't need to spend as much time on it. Finally, let's look at Eternal Star. As you can see, Darkfang's pixelation of Eternal Star looks extremely similar to the actual plaque text, almost identical. There are many small details that match, which makes the Eternal Star theory the most believable theory there is. This was around the point where I really started believing in it saying Eternal Star. Before, I kind of saw it, but I wasn't even close to positive about it. But seeing this completely changed my mind. Darkfang then overlaid the unpixelated text over the pixelated version and the actual text to show how they fit on the sign and added short comments above the sign. For Eternal Star, it was nearly a perfect fit, and the text fit extremely well on the actual sign text. On the L is real plaque, there was a slight resemblance on real, but pretty much nothing else worked. With the L being too narrow, the 2401 being too large, and the word is not fitting well. Finally, on a secret star, the word star fits, but the letters A and S are the wrong shape. Now that we've discussed the different theories, I should go over how Darkfang figured out the 350% increase in text scale. Darkfang said that while looking at in-game screenshots of Mario 64's text, he noticed, quote, Mario 64's font has a slightly imperfect aspect ratio, distorting some of the lettering, which I think is what makes Eternal look like L is real. Darkfang originally thought that he wouldn't be able to recreate the aspect ratio error, but he analyzed the text a little bit and concluded that it was likely a 310% increase in size. I then asked a question regarding the 310% scale, so Darkfang went to test the other elements of the graphical user interface, in this case, the HUD, to see if they were poorly scaled in the same way the text is. He found that the HUD, or heads-up display, also shows signs of improper scaling. He then almost perfectly recreated a HUD element, other than the black edges around the HUD elements in Super Mario 64 that was caused by the developers using a black background instead of a transparent background while creating the HUD elements. He got his recreation to be the same size as the Super Mario 64 HUD element by increasing it by 350%, and that's how he determined that the game uses approximately 350% scaling, which doesn't only apply to the HUD, but also to every 2D element drawn to the screen during runtime, including in-game text. I think now is a good time to explain more in-depth what the 350% increase means and how it could be the cause of the gap between the E and the T in Eternal. So, Darkfang noticed that the Super Mario 64 font looked a little strange and skewed when the game runs in resolutions other than its native resolution of 320 by 238. He noticed that some sections of the text were slightly larger or smaller than other sections. Like here in this photo, you can see that this part of the A looks half a pixel thicker, or that this whole bottom row looks half a pixel taller than most of the other rows of squares in the text. Darkfang didn't initially know why this was happening, but then he realized that the Super Mario 64 developers had to increase the size of the text so that players would be able to read the text even on the worst CRT TVs. Keep in mind that TVs back then were often small despite their mass, low resolution, and consoles were in standard definition. As we previously discussed, they scaled the font up by about 350%. Let me explain why this caused issues. A pixel is a perfect square. A pixel cannot increase or decrease in size. A pixel can change color, but it will never stretch or shrink. You also can't modify a pixel so that, say, half a pixel is red and the other half is green. Sometimes a system will want to display only parts of pixels because the edges of a sprite don't always perfectly line up with the pixels. Imagine a TV or a monitor that is just 5 pixels by 5 pixels, but you want to print a Mario M to the screen. You can't draw partial pixels like how I have shown, so you'd have to find a way to print M as accurately as possible. There are different methods of dealing with this issue. The solution that Nintendo used for the text was something called nearest neighbor interpolation. With nearest neighbor, the edges of visuals will snap to whatever pixel it is closest to. 1.25 of a pixel will snap to become 1 pixel, and 1.75 of one will snap to be 2 pixels. Look at this example Darkfang made for us. Each little grid box represents 1 pixel, and each numbered square represents 1 pixel making up the letter R. As you can see, square number 1 overlaps this pixel a little bit, but it's not nearly enough for it to snap to this pixel and be 4 pixels tall. The same thing continues with squares 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, where they're not close enough to extend to become 4 pixels tall. But these slight overlaps stack on each other, and eventually, square number 8 becomes 4 pixels tall because the top of the square is close enough to this pixel to snap here, and it's close enough to this edge to snap to this pixel, making it 4 pixels tall. Another method of dealing with partial pixels is called bilinear interpolation. Bilinear interpolation fades out pixels to give the illusion of half pixels without actually drawing half pixels. Here's another example made by Darkfang. The R fades to black over a few pixels rather than snapping and only creating full or empty pixels. This is only a simplification of what happens. This isn't exactly what the R would look like with bilinear interpolation, but this is the basic idea of what bilinear interpolation is. Here's another bilinear interpolation example provided by Darkfang. The text is only moving over 1 pixel, but it looks extremely smooth because the pixels fade out and give the illusion of smooth movement. The text of Super Mario 64 has nearest neighbor applied in-game, not bilinear interpolation, so parts of pixels are rounded up or down to the nearest whole pixel rather than faded out. A funny example of nearest neighbor is when Darkfang sent me the animation of bilinear interpolation, and when looking at the animation on Discord messaging, Discord actually uses nearest neighbor in the Discord mini player. When Nintendo was determining the 350% scaling, they didn't realize what effect this would have on the text. The text in-game becomes distorted as a result of the scaling value of 350% causing partial pixels, which leads to nearest neighbor distorting the pixels of the text. This is because 350% isn't a multiple of 100, which makes it an imperfect scale degree, so some pixels are drawn halfway between 2 pixels and then are rounded up, leaving some letters looking off depending on their position on the screen. The distortion doesn't only happen with filled pixels, it also happens with transparent pixels, so the spaces between words can sometimes get larger because of nearest neighbor interpolation. Darkfang demonstrated the nearest neighbor effect using his game-making software. The text is moving the exact same as in the earlier demonstration, but this time the software is using nearest neighbor rather than bilinear. The reason that only the spaces are distorting and not the letters is because Darkfang's software has gotten better at dealing with sprites with time, so they don't distort. But on the Nintendo 64, the letters pixels would have been distorting as well. This is the most probable cause for the odd gap between the E and the T on the plaque. There are a few possibilities for how the nearest neighbor problem affected the actual sign creation. One is that the editor that was used for making the sign used the same engine as the game, or they took a screen capture of the engine's text and scaled it down, and overlaid it onto the plaque graphics background. Another possibility is that the editor being used didn't have a text tool, so they used the game, which already had the 350% scale. A third possibility is that the graphic for the text of the sign was made in 112 by 112 pixels or even 128 by 128, and they used the scaled up text on the graphic because it's what they already had available to them, or because they didn't realize how low the graphics resolutions would be. It's possible that they made this graphic before they even realized they couldn't fit such large files on the Nintendo 64 cartridges, so they had to recreate it in 32 by 32, but still kept the 350% text and shrank it down. As Darkfang put it, that's actually the simplest assumption of the three, but doesn't mean it's right. These explanations all would explain why only the text is distorted, but not the graphic behind the text. Now, after all of that, if you still don't believe Darkfang, that's not all that he sent in the folder. He also sent an in-depth pixel analysis of the first two letters of his Eternal, the first two letters of his L is real, and the first two letters on the actual sign. First, here's the pixel analysis of L is real. So, here on the top, this is Darkfang's creation of about how the L and the I would look from earlier in the video. The shape is in a general L shape, and this slightly filled pixel in the top left is caused by these two pixels adding up and creating a fill on the top left. You can also see that the L's neck is pretty uniform and has no particularly bright spots. But now, looking at the actual letter on the plaque, there's a noticeable bright spot right in the middle of the letter, which would be impossible if it were an L, because L's are very thin all of the way up until the bottom of the letter. Also, here in the orange text, this bright spot would not appear if it were an L, as indicated by his L creation. Over here on the I side, this part is actually pretty easy to disprove. In Darkfang's I, the gap between the dot of the I and the body is clearly visible, but in the actual plaque letter, the gap isn't only non-existent, but it's also the brightest pixel on the letter. Just with the pixel analysis of these two letters, it's safe to say that it's nearly impossible that the plaque says L is real. One could analyze every letter to strengthen the case further, but at this point, no more analysis is needed. Now, let's look at Darkfang's analysis of the E and the T in Eternal. Here you can see the same phantom pixel as seen before, and it's also caused by the two pixels adding up to part of a pixel. This pixel surrounded by purple in the image is the brightest pixel because the E has 3 neighboring pixels there, which results in it being the brightest pixel. These two pixels aren't phantom pixels because of the large amount of space between the lines in the E. Moving down to the actual plaque letter, the brightest pixel is in approximately the same spot. These pixels surrounded by brown are likely a result of the poor scale up performed by Nintendo. Over here at the green, the lack of spacing is likely caused by the 3 lines being bunched together as one solid block because there isn't enough space for interpolation to have gaps. Darkfang's had the spacing because his software is more powerful than what Nintendo was using. And there are many other factors which contribute to how a graphic is compressed, like selection size, the screen position, the scale amount, the interpolation style, and much more. Darkfang left a note saying he was only able to get his E to look like this once, but he had to undo it and couldn't replicate it. As Darkfang puts it, compression is not an exact science, so it's hard to get the same exact result several times. Over here at the T, you can see the phantom pixel in the top left again, and the middle pixel is also the brightest pixel on the T because the back end of the cross was compressed into a single pixel. To the right of the pixel, the right side of the cross is almost completely gone. In the bottom of the T, the imperfect compression of pixels caused one above to be, quote, murdered. Looking at Nintendo's second letter, you can see the same bright spot where the cross is, and the right of the cross is also nearly gone in this one. You can also see that Nintendo's software did a slightly better job than Darkfang's, and it didn't murder the pixel. After seeing the analysis of both L is real and Eternal Star, it appears likely that the plaque reads Eternal Star and at the very least doesn't say L is real. Despite the fact that it's very difficult to replicate Nintendo's compression, the evidence is still convincing that Eternal Star is on the plaque. Like Darkfang says, compression is not an exact science, so it's very hard to replicate, especially when the text is compressed into so few pixels. That's why most people really only talk about the top text, because it's slightly readable, but the bottom text is so small that it's almost impossible to tell what it says. Although it's hard to tell exactly what it says, Darkfang does have a theory on what it could say. He thinks the text could be an uncredited graphics role who worked on the game. Darkfang said, "I ran all 5 names tied to courses in the credits through the same new methodology. None of them fit. Then I noticed the credits don't list graphics specifically, It's entirely possible that the graphics was a single uncredited role, and whoever did the graphics decided to credit himself on the plaque. Sadly, I have neither the time nor the resources to hunt down and test all uncredited names tied to the game. It's very possible that a person who is not credited on the game put their name on the plaque. The reason the person would be uncredited is because Nintendo didn't credit graphics roles on the game. Crediting graphics wasn't a new idea at all. Even games on the Sega Genesis credited people in graphics. On Sega Genesis, the crediting order was programmers, graphics and design, sound, testing, then finished with special thanks. But on Super Mario 64, the order is programming, course design, then sound, which obviously doesn't include graphics. This makes it impossible to know what name is on the plaque, unless whoever wrote it comes out and tells everybody and proves it with enough evidence. We will probably never get a full confirmation from Nintendo on what the sign says, especially because they might not even know anymore. Even if they do know, they might not even be aware of the mystery behind the sign. Beside the Super Mario 64 internet circle, people don't really know or care about this mystery. Whoever made the sign could just be living a normal life, unknowing of the legend they've created. There are a few things that Darkfang thought would be commonly asked after viewing this video, so here are the questions and responses written by Darkfang. Question 1. Why 350% and not 300%? I can't really tell you why. I don't work at Nintendo, but as a game developer myself, I think I'm at liberty to make a really robust guess. The HUD of a game has to be easily read in the most calm moments of a game, as well as the most fierce moments of a game. Mario 64 is fairly tame, so I'll be using speedrunning as an example. Mario 64 is an action-adventure. A player, in this case a speedrunner, must be able to get information in less than a single second. The more time a player spends trying to obtain the information they want at any given time, the more time their attention is off the action in the game loop. Let's say that information is coins. A HUD serves to tell you about the game at present, which means if a player has 50 of the 100 coins they need, the HUD will tell them that. A speedrunner interested in getting the 100 coin star may glance at their coin counter to see how close they are if they haven't been keeping count in their head. Or maybe they'll glance at their remaining health if they're in an underwater stage. If a HUD element is hard to spot or difficult to read, this may impact a player. It's likely the game's HUD elements were scaled up because Nintendo wanted the time it takes for the player's eyes to go from the epicenter of the action to the HUD element they need to be as short as possible. Perhaps they thought 300% was just a bit too small. They also had to keep in mind the kinds of TV screens of the era. Plasma screen TVs weren't really a thing yet, and CRT screens tended to have moderate to severe picture problems. My old CRT had such a bad picture that the text of some games was just unreadable because it was so blurry. The son of a friend of my mom's had a CRT that was so poorly constructed, you could hardly see the HUD elements at the bottom of the screen on some of the games he was playing. It's possible Nintendo feared readability, or were just using test equipment that made it really hard to read the game. So they opted for a scale between what may have felt too small and what was definitely too big. The text is scaled up too, otherwise on poorer screens the words might be hard to read, and also just because the text would seem weirdly small if it weren't scaled up too. I think there was likely supposed to be an anti-alias effect on the text. We all know Mario 64 just barely functions. For example, the smoke. Nintendo was supposed to use the anti-aliasing on the smoke that comes from Mario when he's burnt, but for some reason it's just not turned on. The code for it exists, but was never switched on, so the smoke isn't blended like it should be. The same could go for the text. Maybe Nintendo forgot to anti-alias the text like it did with the HUD, which would have made the distortions much less apparent. Maybe they just forgot, or thought it didn't look good. Question 2. Is L real? It's no small secret Luigi was meant to be in the game as a Player 2 controlled character, but the N64 wasn't able to handle it at the time. This is why GoldenEye 007, Perfect Dark, and Donkey Kong 64 all have nearly empty multiplayer stages compared to their main game loop. Split screen in Super Mario 64 was just too big of an ask for the original releases of the 64, and thus Luigi had to sit that adventure out. Do I think the plaque is a developer trying to reveal that Luigi was supposed to be in the game? No. Content is cut from games all the time. Luigi is no different. That doesn't guarantee they wouldn't, it just means it's not likely. And if they were to bring attention to Luigi having been cut from the game, it wouldn't have been as cryptic as L is real. This is Nintendo we're talking about. If they wanted us to know Luigi was meant to be in the game, they would have had something like a toad saying, "Hey, I thought your brother was coming," or have a puzzle where you could spell out Luigi's name and get coins or something. Question 3. A secret star? The game has been cracked and analyzed more thoroughly than even chess itself. People have found hidden Goombas, hidden coins, hidden lives, unused graphics, repeating collision geometry, and warp drive reverse jumping. If there was a secret star anywhere in the game, it would have been found a long time ago. The truth is that there is no secret star. Question 4. Why Eternal Star? I'll have to admit I have absolutely no idea what the Eternal Star is. A good guess is that it was meant to play a major role in some form of the plot of the Mario universe, but Nintendo dropped it like it was hot, hoping we wouldn't latch onto it like rabid little Easter egg hunters. The only remaining fragments of it, at present, are the Mario Party level of the same name and the statue, as far as I'm aware. Question 5. What's the statue for? I think the truth is far more lame than any theory may suggest. The cynical side of me wants to think there's nothing of value there. It's not trying to tell us about Luigi, it's probably just hinting at the time, upcoming Mario Party game. Sometimes secrets are more hyped than reality can pay off. Our world is too boring and lame for a video game graphic to contain the secret hiding place of real dragons and unicorns on Earth. One thing that did strike me as plausible, at least in my mind, is that Mario Party 64 may have been in development sooner than we know. Maybe Mario Party 64 was supposed to be released alongside Super Mario 64, but for some reason it didn't make it. I don't know that for sure, but it's a good guess. This type of stuff has been happening since the dawn of gaming. At any rate, the theory is that the statue, or the whole thing, not just the plaque, is, or rather was, a Mario Party model, or trophy repurposed for whatever reason to be a Mario 64 decoration. This theory holds water for the simple reason that this practice isn't even something that devs would blink at. We need graphics for this game. Let's just take scrapped graphics from this other game and shove them into our current project. Or, we need graphics for this game. Let's make use of X-failed games' graphics since they already match what we were going to do with this one. Let's take Perfect Dark for example. The game lists graphics, elements, and programming from GoldenEye 007. The turrets from the ice stage in Perfect Dark are the jungle turrets from GoldenEye, and the temple and facility are both playable multiplayer levels in Perfect Dark, taken from the same stages in GoldenEye. With cheats, you can also access and use the classic guns from GoldenEye in Perfect Dark, all with the same sound effects and reload animations. The same was done in Ocarina of Time. Star Fox 64 AI and models were brought in to use the programming and target-seeking behavior of R-Wings for one of its bosses. With a little GameShark/Game Genie hacking, it's entirely possible to load the full R-Wing, complete with model, the normal lasers they shoot, and damage/death behavior from Star Fox 64. Sonic 3D Blast contains a good chunk of sound effects from Sonic 3. Famously, Dr. Evo Eggman Robotnik was supposed to be the jolly, pajama-wearing protagonist of Sega's flagship game to combat Mario. In a contest, a little stylized porcupine won out over everyone's next favorite, bespectacled protagonist, but the small, round mustachioed character was later recycled as a villain. Super Mario Bros. 2, or Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels as it's known in America, is pretty much the exact same game as Super Mario Bros. 1, but harder. It reuses the engine and all the graphics. Many characters, items, and assets from Ocarina of Time are reused in Majora's Mask, along with the engine itself. All of that only backs my theory that the Eternal Star statue may have, at one time, been an asset for Mario Party 64, but was scrapped and used in Mario 64, or as a remnant from some plot in Mario 64's early alpha phase. I suppose it's possible it references the star Bowser is using at the end of the game. The big star at the end could very well be the Eternal Star, but I find it a little disappointing that something called the Eternal Star is just a marginally scaled up Mario 64 star. I reject the notion that Bowser drops the Eternal Star because I want something called the Eternal Star to be enormous and have more power than simply making it so Bowser can take 2 additional bombs to the face and spit blue fireballs. I honestly think L is real is the wrong question. We already know Luigi exists, and we know he was meant to be in the game. The question we should be asking Nintendo all along was, what is the Eternal Star? Thanks to Darkfang for all the help on this video. He absolutely carried me through this one. Plus it was a lot of fun to learn more about this. Thank you if you made it this far, and I'll see you next time.